All right, what's up, guys? I remember what I wanted to talk about the other day that I didn't remember, so I rambled for over an hour about just whatever the fuck popped into my head. Talked about it a little bit on stream yesterday. Um, I think YouTube is cooked. It's probably over. Now, when I say that, it's like a dead man walking scenario. I don't think it's just going to disappear overnight. It might take 3 to 5 years for it to go by the wayside, unless two things happen. One, a serious competitor needs to emerge, and two, there needs to be a watershed moment where people say, you know what, fuck YouTube, I'm done. Otherwise, it's going to be a long, slow death. It may take 5 or even 10 years. And I think a good example of that happening is Twitch, right? I think I've been saying for months now, if not a year or so, that Twitch is over. I think they still have the opportunity to turn around, but I've been watching the way they've been behaving lately, and I don't think they're going to. I think if there's any indication of that, Hassan getting banned for one day on what was already usually his day off again, instead of any real kind of punishment for all the terrible things he said promoting political violence, while other people get banned for what I would say get banned for like a month or a week at least for, I would say, a relatively minor insults in the grand scheme of things. Definitely things that are unacceptable too, but it's like when you see some dude who raped a girl behind a dumpster gets community service because the judge is afraid it's going to ruin his life. Meanwhile, some black kid smoked a little weed and gets 10 years in prison, right? It's one of those things that it's clearly and obviously unbalanced and unfair. And Twitch has 100% taken the side of and decided to wholly defend evil. Uh, Now, is YouTube doing that? Not necessarily. I think in some ways, by the way, this is again the Guatemalan coffee with a little bit of half and half and the coconut creamer. Uh, if you can't tell, we're getting a little bit of a late start today. You can hear the crickets already. It's like 8 p.m. or something. Um, I was up very late last night playing Warframe on stream. Normally we wrap up around the time the sun comes up, 6, 7, 8 in the morning. But I went until like afternoon. It was like 12:30 or something by the time I was done. It was a good stream. We had lots of awesome people stop in. Uh, we're gonna be doing it again tonight. You're always welcome to hang out. At some point soon, I'm going to be starting to go through old RPG story games like I used to. It's always been my bread and butter, my favorite type of gaming. But Warframe's my favorite MMO right now. I don't think it's the best MMO I've ever played, but it is 100% the best free MMO. And I really want to build a community around it. Now, back to the topic at hand. YouTube shooting itself in the dick. The thing people don't realize about true evil is it's very good at making sure you never realize it's evil. I wish I could find this video. There's like a long discussion where someone says like the devil isn't just gonna show up like some fucking demon, just rip the ground open and pour out with a bunch of fiends like in Lost Ark or something like that. No, it's gonna be more like Baldur's Gate, when he comes to you in fancy clothes, offering exactly what you need and asking for only the tiniest bit of consideration in return. And he's just going to erode your soul bit by bit, little by little. And in a way, that's what YouTube is doing endlessly with freedom of speech and your own just right to exist on the internet in a lot of ways. They have this insane war on ad block, which kind of makes no sense in the grand scheme of things because I use Brave browser, which just automatically blocks all ads because I don't click on ads like ever. There are very few ads that I would really be interested in, and it's almost always stuff to do with like guns and weed. And they aren't allowed to do advertisements for that anyways. Yet they are allowed to advertise all types of crypto scams, just disgusting sex things. It's kind of insane what YouTube allows on its ads. It's gotten to the point where even federal government agencies are suggesting you use an ad block simply as a means of public safety. You know, it's like you basically need ad block as a condom to use the internet these days. And it's just a symptom of the larger problem, which again, I don't even know how to put this in words. Like, I'm very good at observing patterns. There's very, very little that surprises me in the world at all these days, whether it's from people or corporations or just nature itself. But I really don't know how to break it down in a conversation that isn't going to take 10 hours, you know? I feel bad when these videos go over an hour, and I'd love to find a way to bring them down to like 10 or 20 minutes at the most, but how do I condense a decade of careful observation and pattern recognition into 10 minutes? It's pretty clear that who's ever running YouTube anymore doesn't really care for their creators, and they care even less for their users. And this has been clear for many years now. And I think the clearest evidence of that, at least on the creator side, is that people are feeling the need to go and start other platforms. The left has their platform Nebula, and the right has their platform Pepperbox. I'm sure there's other platforms I'm not aware of. I don't spend as much time consuming content as I used to because now I spend most of my time producing it. So if there's any like friends or fellow content creators that think I abandoned you, I promise it's not the case. In fact, it's exactly the opposite. I'm picking up my sword to do a little bit more fighting than I did before instead of just hanging back and watching, you know? So that's pretty clear evidence for a long time that creators have been feeling the pressure of the boot. If they felt that it was so bad, they needed to put all this time and energy into, first of all, building these other platforms, and then doing all the effort it takes to try and move their audiences to these other platforms. I don't think either of those platforms are very good for two reasons. The first is that they're paywalled. I don't like putting a money gate in front of free speech, I think is the best way to put it. Like, we could debate the nuances of all that, like, for a long time, but we're not going to do that. Effectively, I think not only is it kind of a bit of a moral quandary for me, but I think it's also a bad business practice, because you're trying to have a paid service which is arguably lower quality, and I'll get to that in a second. It's not shitting on either of those. For in compete, you're trying to have a paid service which is arguably lower quality compete with a free service that is not only higher quality but is the incumbent. So why is the service lower quality? Well, because there's fewer content creators, there's fewer videos, there's probably less support on the technical side. I don't know. I've never been on either platform, specifically because I'm not paying to watch those random videos when I can find them somewhere else, basically in the same form already for free, which is why I believe it's a bad business model. If you really want to move people to your platform, you've got to stop uploading on YouTube and Instagram and TikTok, but they're not going to do that because that would require too big of a sacrifice and probably put their lives in jeopardy because of not being able to put money on the table. And that's really how evil gets to you, right? Here's how to really know the difference between evil and good. Evil will take away your fishing pole, but then in exchange give you an allotment of bread every single day. And look, I can't be evil because I'm feeding you. Good will give you a fishing pole and teach you how to fish, but then say, now man up and go fucking feed yourself, right? And people will say that's evil because it's not providing for your needs, but it's not someone else's duty to provide for your needs. It's your own duty to provide for your needs. But here's the thing too. There's an old saying, God helps those that help themselves. What does that mean? Well, if you go back to the very, very beginning, before we had the Ten Commandments, before we had all these rules the Roman Catholic Church put forward, or whatever religion you subscribe to and were raised on, before the scriptures where they set out all the rules for kosher and other cultures, the rules for halal and all that stuff, the very, very first thing that almost every spiritual text agrees on is the first commandment we were given by God was to be fruitful and multiply. Now, that's actually two commandments built into one, right? The first part is to be fruitful. That means to be productive in your life, to do something besides just mindlessly consuming Netflix and becoming a slave to the machine, because the machine is a machination of the devil. Now, that looks different for everyone, and I think that's the part that makes it really difficult in life, because we all are faced by these societal pressures. You're supposed to grow up and have a family, and we'll get to that part in the second part. That's got to do with the second commandment more. But being fruitful looks entirely different for someone who was gifted with the ability to paint incredible pictures versus someone who was gifted with the ability to program incredible code or something like that, or someone who was gifted with the ability to inherently understand compound interest and things like that. So I think for so many years, society has been based around like, oh, this is the most profitable business right now, so this is what you should be raising your kids to do. If you want your kids to be happy and successful, you're gonna force them into this narrow field that by the time they graduate college, because everyone else is forcing them into the same field, is going to be overrun, and it's going to take them their entire lifetime to pay back their student debt. That's why we keep getting these like oversaturated fields where it's honestly more profitable usually at this point, especially because most colleges these days don't even teach, they just indoctrinate. And they pay you money to they ask you to pay them money to warp your brain and fill your head full of lies. It's fucking backwards as hell. I think the best thing you can do in the short term is go to a trade school. I know electricians and HVAC and roofing guys that make way more than the average person with a liberal arts degree, right? And they have no student loan debt at all, or if they do, it's just like a very minimal loan from like either an associate's degree or little help going to that trade school or something like that. Now, it's important to realize that even those jobs probably won't exist 20 to 30 years from now, at least not in the same form. Will all jobs be replaced by AI entirely? No, but what we're seeing is another industrial revolution here. I think one of the best examples is the assembly line for cars, right? Now, he obviously had some weird views about certain races and religious denominations of people, but Henry Ford absolutely revolutionized the way cars were built and everything was built, really. If you remove the dark parts of his soul and some of those weird things he wrote to newspapers and stuff, and look at what he materially contributed to society, it's one of the most brilliant Americans ever, one of the true captains of industry, in that he was an actual capitalist that understood how the system is supposed to work. He called himself an industrialist because that was the term at the time, during the Industrial Revolution, for what we now today would call a historical capitalist. Modern capitalists aren't even capitalists, they're corporate pawns, but that's a whole rant for another story, another video. So there's this quote that was from him. It was in the Civilization games. I don't know which one. 5 maybe? I think it maybe appeared in multiple ones. But I'm probably going to slightly misquote it. But he says the goal of the industrialist is to make the best product possible while paying the highest wages possible for the lowest possible costs, right? Because there are 3 important factors of making capitalism work. One is you need good quality goods. If like everything you're selling is just an absolute piece of shit, no one's going to want to buy it. The consumers are going to get pissed off and they're going to look for alternatives or find ways to acquire that and make it better on their own. In the words of Gabe Newell, who's the CEO of Valve, which is Steam, the company that has basically a monopoly on the PC gaming market, which, by the way, capitalists are anti-monopoly, not pro-monopoly. That's a corporatist thing, to want monopolies. Well, kind of. Like, the idea is to approach a monopoly but never achieve it, because if you achieve a full monopoly, then you lose competition, and competition is what drives innovation and keeps market prices down. But again, we're not going into the whole capitalism versus corporatism thing today. I just want to be clear that people understand and don't get the words mixed up. So basically what happens is Gabe said piracy isn't a I think you said piracy is a service issue. Again, I don't remember the exact quote, but the whole idea of it is that why don't people pirate songs or video games anymore? It's because they don't need to. Because most people would prefer not to do that. But for too long, it was too inaccessible for too many people. The prices were too high, the way to acquire it was too difficult, and you had to go a million different places. Now that we have streaming services like Spotify, centralized markets like Steam, most people just go to those services to get what they want. And it's a lot easier and a lot less riskier, both legally and for the health of your PC and your personal data, to go to those services instead of LimeWire, right? Now, recently, we've been seeing an uptick in piracy again. Why? Because the services are starting to suck. You no longer can just go to one platform to get all the streaming shows and movies that you want. You now need to pay 10 different subscriptions if you want to watch 10 different shows. So two things are happening. Either people are stopping to watch that shit entirely and just doing other things with their lives, or they'll wait until someone else uploads it and then they're going to watch it there. So I think it's important to realize that. Let me reorganize my thoughts here. Oh, yeah. You need to provide a good product or service if you want people to pay for it. And corporations don't realize that, but capitalists do. The second aspect of that, which I believe is actually the most important aspect of all of it, is pay the best possible wages, right? And the whole reason Henry Ford believed that is, if you read the whole quote, he basically says, if you're making a product that your own workers can't afford to buy, then no one's going to buy the product because they're too busy wondering how they're going to pay for food and medicine, right? The real focus of capitalism isn't supplying those basic needs. That should be a given. The real focus and benefit of capitalism is that we have all these wonderful options. You know, in like fascist or communist society, everyone is going to drive the same Volkswagen Bug. It's the only option you're going to have. And you only get one if you're one of the government's favorite people. And that's just the way it works in both capitalism and fascism, right? Otherwise, you've just got to like uh, get on the back of the bus with all the other working class peons, which I've always found to be the most ironic thing, especially from the communist side, because they're like, oh yeah, this is all pro working class now. Fucking serve your government, you little spineless bitches. It's just so fucking ironic. I think both communism and fascism are the ultimate expressions of evil in this world. They just put a different face and a different name on the same evil. The same way that I believe that if you look at all these different religious texts from all these different cultures, they're just putting a different face and a different name on the same good. So the next thing, I know how I spent the shortest amount of time on that, but I feel like that's the easiest thing to understand, right? The whole idea of capitalism is that instead of all being forced to drive the same Volkswagen Bug, and I use that as an example because just look up the history of Volkswagen with Nazi Germany. You'll be surprised if you don't know already. Then now in a capitalist society, you have the choice to choose between a Ford Mustang or a Dodge Charger or a Chevy truck. Does Chevy? Yeah, Chevy still exists. I think it's GM that doesn't exist anymore. One of those big companies that bent over and took the bailout from the government just got shut down or got combined into Chrysler or something like that. I don't really pay much attention to any of that stuff anymore. I've got my own things to worry about. I learned enough. I acquired enough data to observe that pattern and figure out and moved on to other things. The only company that didn't take the bailout was Ford, which is why I like using them as an example, despite the questionable history of some of the founders' statements. But I think they're the best example of a true American company in that they managed to survive the automotive industry crisis without taking the government bailout. And then the government just copied exactly what Ford did, only it took them several more years and a lot more money to do it. So, the whole idea is that competition is supposed to drive prices down because if the only thing you can buy is one Volkswagen Bug or three different variations of a Volkswagen, you got your truck, you got your hatchback, and you got your minivan, right? Then Volkswagen can basically charge whatever they want for it. But if you have Ford competing with Dodge, competing with Chrysler, competing with Mazda, because I'm pro global trade, by the way. I love trading with other countries. Get some of those awesome Japanese and European cars in here. Fiat, I think, is really underrated. One of my friends back in Pittsburgh has always driven a Fiat, and it's the funniest thing because he's like the tallest dude, but he has the tiniest car. And I just think it's really cool that in capitalism you have those options, but those options also make it cheaper for everyone. That's why things like the internet and healthcare are so expensive because they have these micro monopolies where you aren't allowed to have competition because there's one internet company to choose from or one healthcare or at most two, and they're shaking hands saying like, hey, we're both going to charge $500 for insulin, right? So I believe that's the most important aspect, and the aspect where corporations and this corporate communist society that we have right now really goes wrong is that it's not paying high enough wages. And that's why the economy is suffering, because no one can really afford to buy these things anymore. And I'm going to wrap this all back into YouTube in a second. I just want to finish this train of thought. The third aspect, which is the one thing that corporations actually get right, but they have prioritized in the wrong order, is to do it for the lowest possible cost. They have reorganized the statement. If we go back to the original statement, it's the goal of the industrialist is to provide the best possible goods while paying the best possible wages for the lowest possible price, for the lowest possible cost. And the reason that's important, let's make sure we wrap that in. We talked about why providing goods is important. We talked about why providing good pay is important. The reason why making sure you do it for the lowest possible cost is important is because if you don't, you're just going to fucking go out of business, right? It's that simple. That's the end all be all. It's the most simplest part. But the problem with these modern corporations and the whole corporatist idea in general is that becomes the highest thing. They become insanely driven by profit motive, and they're just doing it all fucking backwards, where they think the best way to increase their profit is to lower their costs at the expense of everything else. But in reality, they'd be infinitely more profitable if they were to increase the quality of their product and increase the wages they were paying people for two reasons. One, if you create a supremely great product in a world where everyone else is just constantly experiencing insane levels of enshittification, then people are going to flock to you like crazy. Even if it costs more than everything else, because there's also a bias that humans have towards, well, if it costs more, it's better, right? Now, there's a limit to that, of course, but people realize that if you're paying $10 for something, it's probably going to be some cheap, flimsy plastic piece of shit. Whereas if you pay $30 or $40 for it, you might get like a solid metal or like higher quality plastic, maybe some type of plastic alloy type thing. There's crazy material sciences going out right now. So there's a perception that cost increases value to somewhat, which is why you have people that are dumb enough to pay like $1,200 for a hoodie when you can get a hoodie that's just as good for $30 to $50, right? The other thing is the wages, which I said is the most important thing, because the people that are paying these $1,200 for a hoodie are two kinds of people. One, people that are already either profiting off of it somehow because they're being paid to promote it, or they're egotistical, evil sons of a bitches that are using it as a status symbol to make other people feel lesser than themselves and to elevate themselves over other people. The other type of person, really, is someone who can't afford it but thinks that somehow they can buy happiness. And they don't realize that happiness doesn't come from material things. Now, it's important, an aspect of happiness is that you can meet all of your basic human needs, which is why studies have found that more money does mean more happiness up to a point, but that peters off around $200,000 to $300,000 per year. And there's other studies to show that once you get beyond that, it starts going back down again, right? Because more money, more problems. So the reason that we have so many problems in the United States right now are there two issues. The quality of the services are fucking terrible because while the capitalist thinks I want to make the best possible product while paying the best possible wages for the lowest possible cost, the corporatist flips that on its head and says, I want to have the lowest possible cost. And to do that, I need to pay the lowest possible wages and make the shittiest possible product, which I think is where you get the term. It's very possible. Do you know what an MVP is? It's not the most valuable player. It's the minimum viable product. That's why you have all of these fucking massive AAA game companies that can't put out a stable game on release, and it takes 4 fucking months before you can even play that game. But you have these indie developers that they just come out of nowhere, and with like 1 to 3 people, they make Schedule 1 or Lethal Company, and you just have these awesome fucking games that are finished products on release. And there is space for minimum viable products. And what do I mean like that? Well, look at Baldur's Gate 3. That game was in early access for at least a year, if not 2 or 3. And yet, when it came out for full release, it was absolutely and arguably one of the... Bro, this damn phone. Speaking of inshitification, it just cut off in me mid-video again because it didn't tell me I was running out of space till it was too damn late. And this, I think, is a perfect example of why YouTube, which is owned by Google, which made this phone, is intentionally making bad products, right? They want it to frustrate you so you spend more money. And, all right, let's keep moving on. So, I don't know exactly where it cut off, but I was talking about how I think Baldur's Gate, one of the best video games of all time, and definitely within the turn-based RPG sphere, and how a minimum viable product is okay if it's like a limited release and you're intending to improve it and actually make it a great product. But then you look at these other massive AAA companies, they're just throwing out the shittiest video games ever, where Call of Duty Activision, which is one of the most profitable video games ever, is just not even hiring artists anymore and just putting shitty AI images into this super premium game that costs more than most other games that have the wrong number of fingers on a zombie, right? So, how does this all relate back to YouTube? Because if you just wrap it all in and look at YouTube's ethos as of recently, it is very much like everyone else, where they're looking at the lowest possible cost to provide the cheapest possible good while paying the lowest possible wages. There have been several waves of adpocalypses, which is the first reason why all these creators went and they were like, you know what, I'm gonna go make this Pepperbox website. I'm gonna go make this Nebula website. It's because YouTube keeps cutting their wages. It's that simple. And wages are the most important thing, because if your workers can't afford to pay for your product anymore, then no one can, right? There's only like 1% of the population are the captains of industry type, the 1%. Uh, and it's really 1% of the 1% at this point. So you're selling to 1/100th% of the population. That is an extremely small target audience. How are you going to sustain a million or billion-dollar business like that? You can't. It's going to eventually collapse. It's too top heavy. There's a reason why actual pyramids are thick at the base and skinny at the top. In the United States, it's basically been flipped on the head, where the middle class basically doesn't exist anymore. And we now have this increasingly large working class that has just a fraction of the spending power. And we have this elite class where it has almost all of the spending power, and it's just becoming increasingly top heavy. It's only a matter of time before something like that topples over. It's just going to take a little gust of wind and everything's going to collapse. So YouTube is aiming for the lowest possible cost, and one of the primary ways they've been doing that is by reducing to the lowest possible wages. They want to give as little money as possible to the creators so that the rest can go into their bank accounts and to their board of directors and their investors. Now, how else do they cut costs? By offering an intentionally worse product. There's been this ongoing war of YouTube versus ad block, and the vast majority of people despise ads. In fact, that's one of the things that made YouTube so great and popular in the first place, was instead of having to deal with all the bullshit ads of cable TV, you could just go on YouTube, watch someone you enjoyed, and then go about your day. But now it's become such a level where the ads on YouTube are so obnoxious that people are going so far as to set up their entire internet with firmware on their Wi-Fi router just to block all ads at that basic level. And there's a lot of other ways in which the YouTube service is getting worse. They removed the dislike button because, God forbid how people actually feel about the video. We're not even allowed customer reviews anymore. We just want you to consume everything mindlessly. And I've already been rambling long enough, trying to condense a decade worth of observations into 10 minutes. And this new section is almost worth 10 minutes. I'm sure this is probably like a 40-minute video once I smack everything together. So why do I think YouTube is on the way out? Because they obviously don't care about their creators. They obviously don't care about their viewers. And I think viewers are starting to realize that. And the only reason it really still exists at this point is because they have such a monopoly on that market that nobody has been able to unseat them yet. But all it's going to take is one website, the way Kick has slowly been overtaking Twitch, or at least catching up to it. I don't know if they've officially overtaken it yet. But all it's going to take is one website to create a viable alternative, and YouTube is going to start immensely losing ground in a similar way. And whether it happens overnight or over 10 years will really depend on just how quickly YouTube wants to self-destruct and just how quickly this new website gets its shit together, because Kick had some problems at first. It still has some problems, especially with its public perception, but it's doing a lot better now. You know, banning some of the worst offenders that weren't getting banned or were getting banned and then unbanned a day later. And uh, it's working on providing a better viewer experience. I've heard a lot of people say the only thing that's stopping Kick from taking over Twitch is the Twitch drops, the video game drops that you get for watching viewers. I think once Kick manages to secure that, if they do manage to secure that, Twitch, unless it really gets its shit together, will cease to exist. What's stopping people from leaving YouTube? Well, it's the fact that other people haven't left YouTube. Because most people are, unfortunately, kind of dumb, don't really think for themselves, and just fall into a herd mentality. Why does a video get 10 million views? Well, because it got 1 million views. Why does a video get 1 million views? Well, because it got 1,000 views. And YouTube is designed to feed that and push the algorithm and capitalize on the herd mentality. So that's going to backfire on YouTube eventually, when all that's necessary really is for viewers to start trickling to a different platform, because content creators have been sick of YouTube for 5 years at least, if not more. They're all looking for different alternatives, trying to find a better option. There just isn't one, primarily because the viewership is still on YouTube. But there's an old saying, if you build it, they will come. And I'm not talking about Dan Clancy and his OnlyFans girls. All right. I think that's enough for today. I gotta go stream more Warframe. I gotta figure out what's wrong with my dryer and all kinds of things. I got so much work to do. But I'm still out here creating content for you, doing the best I can to turn the world from this dark, dark path it's on. I don't know if it's going to be enough, but at least I can say I did my best. So I love all of you, and God bless America. Cheers.